Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to witness the moment one DNA test threatens to tear everything apart until Tuna returns home, ready to leave forever, and Alex reveals the truth that changes everything. He already knew Henry wasn't his, and he chose them anyway. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Morning arrived softly over the little countryside house, but the peace never had a chance to settle. Sunlight filtered through the thick green canopy outside and fell across the yard in pale gold, touching the wooden porch, the packed earth ground, and the small cradle where baby Henry slept without a care in the world. The air smelled of damp soil and fresh leaves warming after dawn. It should have felt like the beginning of an ordinary day. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a trial. Thu appeared at the doorway with a face so composed it was almost harder to bear than open anger. She stood straight, one hand resting at her side, the other holding the edge of her shawl against the morning breeze. Her eyes went directly to Tuna. No hesitation, no softness to prepare the moment. "Today we go for the test," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the kind of pressure that leaves no space to pretend you misunderstood. "To see if the child is really Alex's." The words struck the small house like something thrown through glass. Tuna stood near the table with one hand still resting on the cloth she had been folding. At first, she did not move at all. Her fingers tightened slowly around the fabric until the knuckles paled. The usual polite smile she wore in difficult situations disappeared from her face so quickly it was as if it had never been there. Her eyes lowered, not because she had accepted the accusation, but because she knew this moment had been waiting for her for a long time. Inside her, fear did not arrive all at once. It rose in layers. First came the cold shock of hearing the demand spoken aloud. Then came the heavier thing beneath it, the knowledge that love, peace, the fragile little life she had been allowed to build beside Alex could all be measured now against one result on one piece of paper. Thu took a step inside. "Don't let Alex suffer any disadvantage," she said. That sentence cut differently. It wasn't only suspicion. It was a mother's fear sharpened into judgment. Tuna felt her breathing change, growing shallower without her permission. She looked once toward the cradle where Henry still slept, his small chest rising and falling in complete innocence. He had no idea that the adults around him were already pulling at the threads of the home he had come to trust. Tuna gave the faintest nod. She still could not force words out. Thu watched her carefully, and the silence only hardened her expression. By the time the sun had climbed a little higher, the house no longer felt warm. The morning light still poured through the doorway, but it seemed colder now, stripped of comfort. When Thu spoke again, her tone was lower and sharper. "You need to make this clear," she said. "Alex is my son. I won't let him raise someone else's child." Tuna lowered her head further, and her loose hair fell forward around her face, hiding the redness already gathering in her eyes. She hated that her silence looked like guilt. She hated even more that she had no defense simple enough to survive this kind of scrutiny. The truth had never been easy, and now it stood between them like something alive. Thu stepped closer. "If the child isn't his," she said, voice trembling now with anger and hurt, "then why are you still here? Do you plan to let Alex carry this for the rest of his life?" That finally forced something out of Tuna. Not anger, not protest, only a voice so strained it barely sounded like her own. I will do the test." Even as she said it, the words felt like a blade turning inward. She knew what the result might do, not only to her, but to Alex, to the house, to whatever fragile shape their happiness had managed to take. Thu nodded once. A tiny measure of softness passed through her face, but it was not comfort. It was only the temporary satisfaction of someone who believed truth was finally being forced into the open. Tuna turned away before her tears could rise fully. She crossed to the cradle and touched Henry's head with trembling fingers. His hair was soft, warm, real. The world narrowed for a second into that one small point of contact. Loneliness wrapped around her so completely that it almost felt physical. The birds outside were still singing. Somewhere in the yard, a chicken scratched at dry leaves. Life kept moving in ordinary rhythms while her own heart seemed to be standing at the edge of something irreversible. Not long after, the front door opened again. Alex stepped inside, carrying the dust and heat of a day's work on him. The moment he entered, he felt it. He didn't need anyone to explain that something in the room had gone wrong. Thu sat rigid. Tuna stood beside the cradle with her face turned slightly away. The atmosphere itself had thickened. He set his bag down slowly. "Mom," he said. Thu answered before Tuna could even lift her eyes. "Alex, you need to know the truth," she said. "I won't let my son raise someone else's child." Alex looked at her, then at Tuna, then back again. His face did not harden. That was what made the moment feel even more unbearable. He simply stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Mom, it's okay," he said. "For me, being with Tuna is already enough." Thu stared at him. "It doesn't matter whose child it is," he continued, "as long as she and the baby are safe and happy." The room seemed to shift when he said it. The sentence did not solve anything. It did not erase suspicion or pain, but it fell into the suffocating air like cool water. And Tuna felt, for one trembling second, the terrible relief of being defended. Thu shook her head immediately. "My son cannot suffer such a disadvantage," she said, her eyes already reddening. "I won't accept it." Alex turned to Tuna then. His expression softened so quickly it almost made her break apart. He reached for her hand and took it gently, his fingers closing around hers with quiet certainty. Gratitude hit her with almost the same force as guilt. Even now, he was choosing her. Even now, after all the tension, after all the suspicion, after all the things he had every right to fear, he was standing beside her without hesitation. Alex looked back at his mother, and when he spoke again, his voice was firmer. "I already made my choice," he said. "Please don't force me to choose between you and my family." The word family hung in the room like a challenge and a vow. Henry shifted in his sleep at that exact moment, a soft, restless sound coming from the cradle. The timing of it made something inside Tuna tighten painfully. The adults were standing in the middle of pride, truth, loyalty, and pain. And in the middle of it all was one innocent child who needed none of those words and all of their protection. By midday, the sunlight had turned harsher. It cut through the leaves outside and fell in sharp strips across the yard. The house felt hotter, smaller. Thu had not left. She remained seated near the door, her presence a silent reminder that the truth was no longer something anyone could postpone. Alex had stepped out briefly to deal with work, leaving the two women in a silence so thick it seemed to pulse. At last, Thu spoke again, but the anger in her voice had changed shape. It had become something more painful, more human. "You know the answer better than anyone," she said. "If the child isn't Alex's, don't let him carry that burden forever." Tuna closed her eyes for the briefest second. Then she bent down, lifted Henry into her arms, and held him close. Not defensively, not theatrically. The way a mother holds the last certain thing in a room that has become impossible to trust. Without another word, she walked out of the house. The district hospital was not far, but the path there felt endless. The wind moved hard against her face as she walked, stirring her hair loose around her cheeks. Henry shifted once in her arms, then settled again, trusting her completely. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. Not because she didn't know what she was doing, but because she knew exactly what it could cost. Was love strong enough to survive a truth like this? She had no answer. At the hospital, the corridor felt cold and impersonal. White walls, plastic chairs, a clerk calling names without looking up. Tuna sat with Henry in her lap and stared ahead while the noise of the building drifted around her like something from another life. When her number was called, she stood on legs that no longer felt steady. The test itself was quick. Too quick for something with the power to break a life open. When the doctor returned with the paper, he read the result in the same flat, professional voice he had probably used 100 times before. The child is not biologically Alex's. That was all. No cruelty in it, no sympathy, just information. But to Tuna, the sentence landed like a stone thrown into still water, breaking every fragile layer she had been trying to hold in place. For a second, she did not cry. She only sat there, eyes open, unable to move, the paper clenched in her hand. Then Alex's face came into her mind, not abstractly, but vividly. His smile, his voice, the warmth of his hand over hers, the way he had said family without flinching. Her tears fell onto Henry's hair as she bent to kiss his forehead. She knew now that she was carrying more than truth back to that house. She was carrying a decision. The hospital corridor seemed colder on the way out. Tuna stepped through the sliding doors with Henry held close against her chest and the folded test result crumpled in one hand. The late afternoon sun had already started to tilt low, turning the dust on the road outside a deep rust red, but none of that warmth reached her. She moved slowly, not because Henry was heavy, but because the paper in her hand had changed the weight of everything. The child is not biologically Alex's. The doctor had spoken the sentence plainly, without judgment, without pause, without understanding what it would do once it left the room. To him, it had been a fact. To Na, it was a blade finally pulled from hiding. She walked down the dirt path toward home, as if each step had to be negotiated with her body. Henry stirred once, made a sleepy sound, then settled again against her. His little hand was curled near her collarbone. He knew nothing. He trusted everything. That innocence made the ache inside her almost unbearable. She had imagined this moment before, in the quietest and cruelest corners of her mind. Imagined the result. Imagined Alex's face when she placed truth in front of him. Imagined herself leaving before he could say anything, just to spare herself the sight of disappointment. But now that the paper was real and folded in her hand, imagination felt kinder than reality had any right to be. The fields on either side of the path glowed with the final light of day. A few birds crossed low over the grass. Far away, someone was calling cattle home. The world had remained exactly the same. That was the hardest part. Her life felt as if it had split open, and yet the evening still gathered itself in ordinary ways. By the time she reached the yard, dusk had deepened. The house stood in a wash of red and purple light, the old wood dark against the evening sky. The door was open. Alex was inside. He was sitting at the table when she stepped in, exactly as if he had been waiting in the same position since she left. One arm rested on the wood. His shoulders were still. His eyes found her immediately. The room was so quiet that even Henry's breathing felt loud. Tuna couldn't speak at first. She crossed the distance to the table, bent down, and laid the paper in front of him. Her hand was shaking badly enough that she had to flatten her palm on the table to steady it. When she finally forced the words out, her voice sounded broken, even to herself. "It's not your child." The sentence hung between them with the terrible finality of a door closing. Tears came hard then, faster than she could stop them. They rolled down her face and fell onto the front of her shirt, onto Henry's blanket, onto the table where the result paper lay. She bowed her head because she could not bear to see his expression right away. "If you can't accept it now," she said, struggling to breathe evenly between the words, "I'll take the baby and leave. We can live on our own." The room stayed silent, not empty silence, not frozen shock. A different kind, the kind that comes when one person has prepared themselves for rejection so completely that they don't know what to do when it doesn't arrive at once. Alex looked at the paper first, then he looked at her. He did not recoil, he did not demand explanation, he did not ask why she had hidden anything. He simply rose from his chair and came around the table slowly, as if moving too fast might make her break apart completely. Tuna kept her face lowered. She was bracing for distance, for pity, for some new line in his eyes that would tell her the life they had built together was already ending. Instead, she heard his voice, low, warm, steady. "It's okay," she lifted her head sharply, almost not trusting that she had heard him correctly. Alex was standing close enough now that she could see every detail in his face. There was pain there, yes, but not the pain she had expected. Not betrayal, not disgust. Something sadder, older, gentler, the look of a man carrying a truth he had already made peace with long before she knew he had. He reached up and wiped one tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Actually," he said softly, "I already knew." Tuna stared at him. "I knew the child wasn't mine," he continued. "A long time ago." The words hit her almost as hard as the result itself. "What?" she whispered. Alex let out a small breath, the kind that comes when someone has finally decided to stop protecting everyone else from the truth. "I just couldn't make you accept bringing your own child with you," he said. "You kept trying to carry everything alone. I knew if I pushed too hard, you would run before you believed anyone could love both of you." Tuna's whole body seemed to go still in his arms without him even touching her yet. She looked at him as if she had never really seen him before, not because he had changed, but because the depth of his love had just become visible in a way it had never been before. He had known, and still chosen her. Known, and still stood beside Henry. Fed him water, carried him, called himself part of the family before anyone had given him permission to do so. The force of that realization undid something in her all at once. She began to cry harder, not from shame anymore, but from gratitude so fierce it was almost painful. Alex did not speak immediately. He simply stepped forward, took Henry carefully from her shaking arms, then pulled both mother and child close against him in the same movement. The three of them stood like that in the middle of the small room while dusk finished settling outside. Tuna pressed her face into his chest. Henry, disturbed by the movement, let out a small, confused sound, then settled again between them. Alex held them both with the calm certainty of someone who had already made this decision so long ago it no longer felt like sacrifice. His love was not built on blood. That truth arrived inside her slowly and then all at once. It was built on choice made quietly, repeatedly, without witnesses, without reward. Outside, the last red of sunset disappeared. The first evening insects had begun their restless chorus. Somewhere down the road, a motorbike passed and faded into distance. Inside, something had been torn open, but something else, equally important, had survived. Much later, when the tears had lessened and Henry had woken fully, night had already taken hold of the village. A thin crescent moon hung above the tall trees, casting pale silver light over the packed earth yard. The porch had been swept clean, and the simple dinner table set outside. No one had said much while preparing the meal. They didn't need to. Alex served the rice. Tuna brought out the braised fish and a plate of boiled water spinach, bright and green under the porch light. Henry sat in the little handmade high chair between them, blinking at the bowls and reaching for anything within sight. It was such a modest meal that another family might have overlooked it, but to them, it felt almost sacred. The clink of spoons against bowls sounded unusually soft in the night air. The breeze moved through the leaves overhead, carrying the smell of damp soil, cooked fish, and smoke from a distant kitchen. No one rushed. No one filled the silence just to escape it. Alex picked the tenderest piece of fish from the bowl and placed it into Tuna's rice. She looked up at him, eyes still red rimmed from crying, but changed now. The sorrow was still there. So was the shock. But beneath both, something steadier had begun to return trust, rebuilt not from words, but from what he had already proven. Henry suddenly stretched one hand toward the rice bowl and made a delighted little noise. The sound broke the heaviness at once. Alex smiled and touched the top of the boy's head. Tuna watched them both and understood the shape of her life more clearly than ever before. This family no longer depended on biology. It depended on love that had already survived truth. She leaned down and kissed Henry's forehead, then looked at Alex across the small table. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes held the same message his arms had held earlier, the same one his choices had held all along. I am still here. I chose you before this paper. I choose you now. Moonlight fell across the table, turning the steam from the rice silver at the edges. The little yard seemed smaller, gentler, held together by something more durable than certainty. For the first time since morning, Tuna took a full breath without feeling like it would break inside her. The truth had not destroyed them. It had stripped them down to what mattered most. And what remained was stronger than fear, stronger than blood, stronger even than the life she had been so afraid to lose. A man, a woman, a child between them, and a love quiet enough to survive the hardest truth and still stay seated at the same table under the same moon, choosing tomorrow.